Whenever. Awesome. Hello. Our social movement that we chose is going to be on Black Lives Matter, and this was created by Mateo, Kinu, Valerie, Jacob, and Alexis. So, to introduce the topic, Black Lives Matter is an international worldwide social movement that was formed in the United States in the year 2013. This movement was also co founded in 2013 as an online movement. Black Lives Matter is dedicated to fighting and putting an end to racism and as well as anti-Black violence. Many people can recognize the trend started from the hashtag Black Lives Matter used on social media. BLM activists have held large and influential protests in cities across the United States as well as internationally. Black Lives Matter is led by activists in local areas who organize their own campaigns and programs by three Black community organizers, Patrice Khan Cullers, Elisa Garza, and Opal Tameti, who you can find over here on the right side of the screen. Those three ladies formed Black Lives Matter after George Zimmerman, who was age 28 at the time, was acquitted on all charges from his fatal shooting of Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was an unarmed Black teenager who was shot and killed in Sanford, Florida in February 2012. Zimmerman, who was a neighborhood watch volunteer at the time, had seen Martin walking in his neighborhood and called the police because he thought Martin looked, and I quote, very suspicious. George Zimmerman was told not to do anything, but he disregarded those orders and ended up following Martin, got into an argument with him, and resulted in shooting and fatally killing him. When the police arrived on the scene, Zimmerman claimed that he had been assaulted by Martin and fired in self-defense. Zimmerman remained free for weeks until he was finally charged with second-degree murder and arrested in April 2012. At his trial, again, Zimmerman claimed that he had acted in self-defense, this time quoting a controversial Florida law known as Stand Your Ground. This law applies to any kind of threat imposed by an attacker that has your life in danger. Zimmerman's acquittal is looked at as injustice as well as inequality and led to nationwide protests around the world. Martin's death highlighted persistent acts of racism in the United States and in particular over the issue of racial profiling. So why, you ask, is Trayvon Martin's case so impactful? Well, in March 2012, President Barack Obama, who was the first African-American president of the United States, expressed his concern at the shooting. Obama compared Martin to his younger self and characterized racial profiling as a reality that most African Americans, including himself, have had to face. Protests as well continued across the United States because of the Zimmerman verdict and led to the formation of the Black Lives Matter social movement, which focused on better treatment of African Americans in all aspects of American society. Trayvon Martin's death has also inspired a generation of protests against police and violence towards African American people. Shortly after the trial as well, the family of Trayvon Martin established the Trayvon Martin Foundation. This is dedicated to helping parents and families that have lost children to gun violence, and they speak out frequently against stand your gun laws.
In Staten Island, New York, on July 17, 2014, two New York police officers confronted Eric Garner, a 43-year-old African American. He was a father of six. He was confronted for illegally selling cigarettes. Garner told the officers he was tired of being harassed and was not selling any cigarettes. They then attempted to arrest him. When Officer Pantaleo reached for his arms, Garner pulled his arms away. He was wrestled down by many officers. Garner was put into an illegal chokehold by Pantaleo, which is the picture on the right. While being pinned down and yelling, "I can't breathe," the officer refuses to get off of him and lets him die. Refuses to not get off of him and lets him die. He said this 11 times, was the first time not clear enough. Garner dies due to losing consciousness for being in a chokehold. There was footage that went viral and that started many protests. Those were his last words, and this is what started the Black Lives Matter movement with "I Can't Breathe." People of color are always being wrongfully accused and dying for no reason. This man was not doing anything wrong and was put down by the police, which led to his death. He begged for his life, a life that shouldn't have been taken away so early. These protests are meant to bring awareness and stop discrimination, but when will it end?
Sandra Bland was a 28-year-old African-American female from Naperville, Illinois. And on July 13, 2015, she was stopped by a Waller County police officer for a minor traffic violation. She was arrested and booked for assault on public officer, but the video of her arrest tells a different story. You can hear Bland asking an officer, why she's being held, why she's being handled so roughly. So after this happens, 3 days later, on the day she was supposed to get out of jail, she was found dead, hanging from her jail cell, and the judge ruled it as a suicide. After Sandra Bland's death in Texas jail drew outrage across the nation, two Texas lawmakers fixed a comprehensive bill to address racial profiling during traffic stops and ban police from stopping drivers on traffic violation as a pretext to investigate other potential crimes and limit police searches of vehicles so that this type of situation won't ever happen again. We are still looking for justice as a Black community because there are a lot of things that keep happening to us and we need to make a difference.
Breonna Taylor was an EMT who died March 13, 2020 at the age of 26 when Louisville PD entered her apartment unannounced without identifying themselves. Taylor's partner fired his registered firearm in fear of an intruder, resulting in two officers shooting into the dark room 32 times, 6 of those bullets hitting Taylor. There was a 20-minute gap until Taylor received any medical attention, resulting with Taylor's death. Afterwards, the hashtag Say Her Name trended on social media, gaining a lot of celebrity attention. But even with the media attention, her case did not get the justice she deserved. No officer was found guilty.
Around 8 p.m. on May 25th, Minneapolis police officers responded to a call from a store clerk who claimed Mr. Floyd had paid for cigarettes with a counterfeit $20 bill. The police department said in an initial statement, the police said that Mr. Floyd appeared to be under the influence. It said that officers ordered him to step away from his car and that he had resisted them after he got out. Officers noted he appeared to be suffering medical distress. The statement read, after which they called an ambulance. The statement lacked critical details about the fatal encounter, and bystander video and officer body camera footage released in August helped to fill in the blanks. The body camera footage shows police officers approaching a car in which Mr. Floyd is sitting in the driver's seat. In the footage, Mr. Lane, one of the officers, taps his flashlight on the window and asks Mr. Floyd to show his hands. After being asked several times, Mr. Floyd eventually opens the car door while apologizing. 6 seconds later, after the door opens, Mr. Lane draws his gun and points it at Mr. Floyd and says, "Put your explicit hands up right now." Without explaining the reasoning for the stop, he pulls Mr. Floyd out of the car. After removing Mr. Floyd from the vehicle, Mr. Lane and Mr. Krieng, two officers, handcuff him and walk him across the street to their squad car. Mr. Floyd protests and resists sitting in the back seat, saying he is claustrophobic, and officers try to force him in. He pushes himself out of the other side of the other vehicle, saying he is going to lie on the ground. The three officers proceed to pin Mr. Floyd down, with Mr. Chauvin kneeling on his neck, which is the image to the right, and two other officers kneeling on his legs and wrists. There's also a fourth officer that was keeping bystanders away from the incident. Mr. Floyd began saying repeatedly that he could not breathe, and Mr. Chauvin kept his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck regardless for 9.5 minutes. 6 minutes after the officers put Mr. Floyd face down, and only after bystanders shouted at them to attend him. Mr. Krieng checks for Mr. Floyd's pulse. The officers continued to hold load him into the ambulance, and he was pronounced dead that night. Following this shocking video's release, the officers involved were fired but not immediately arrested. This outraged Black Lives communities all over the world and propelled the Black Lives Matter movement to get more involved. By May 26th, unrest broke out in the Minneapolis St. Paul Arena, which formed a riot that lasted from May 26th to June 8th, 2020, and resulted in over $2 billion worth in property damages. Riots such as this one swept across the nation, and protesters by the millions filled the streets of major cities to support George Floyd, and the countless families affected by these incidents. These protests ensued for 19 consecutive months following the death of George Floyd. And this is our original artwork that we created in order to dedication of this moment in history in honor of George and the millions who stood to stand for justice and for his life and for the lives of many others that we discuss. Even though the movement may not be as heavily covered anymore within the media, there are still plenty of ways to get involved. One of the ways is to support the affected families directly by using GoFundMe or similar websites. You can also donate to the Black Lives Matter itself, the organization, but can also show up to protests. Protests are still ongoing, they still occur. You can just do your research, search up where in your area you can find one and just show up. Another way is to exercise your vote and sign petitions. There's a lot of ways that your vote can affect and impact Black lives. And so it's just a great thing to make your voice heard. The fourth and final thing is just to support Black creators and business owners all throughout America.